Hello everyone, we are Group 9 and for today's presentation, we will be discussing auditing the revenue cycle. Our discussion will focus on the processes, technologies, controls, and audit procedures involved in it. This chapter examines the audit procedures associated with the revenue cycle and is divided into three primary sections. First section is the revenue cycle activities and technologies. Second is the revenue cycle audit objectives, controls, and test of controls. Third is the substantive test of revenue cycle accounts. Now, for the first section, it is about the review of alternative technologies used in both legacy and modern systems. The focus is on the key operational tasks performed under each technological environment. Then, the second section discusses revenue cycle, audit objectives, controls, and test of controls that an auditor would perform to gather evidence needed to limit the scoping, timing, and extent of substantive tests. The last section describes revenue cycle substantive tests in relation to audit objectives using ACL software, techniques, and functions. Now, let's go first to the first section, which is the revenue cycle activities and technologies. The revenue cycle includes all activities related to processing sales and receiving cash from customers. In a computerized information system or CIS environment, there are different ways this data is processed. Hence, the revenue cycle has three data processing alternatives. First is the batch processing system. Second alternative is the integrated real-time processing system. And the third is the point of sale or POS system. The batch processing system involves gathering together transactions, in this case, sales orders, and processing them as a group. While for the integrated real-time processing system, this alternative processes transactions individually as the economic events occur. And the point-of-sale system are used for operations that are common to business-to-consumer organizations or B2C organizations. Now let's take a closer look at the batch processing system, which is one of the traditional data processing methods used in the revenue cycle. Batch processing system involves gathering together transactions and processing them as a group. For this presentation, we will discuss the batch processing system in two cases. One is in a case of sales order and the other is in a case of cash receipts. Now let's take a first look into the case of batch processing sales order system. This system employs a mix of technologies. The order taking, credit checking, warehousing, and shipping are performed manually, while the accounting records are processed by computer programs using alternative files, structures, and technologies. Now the following discussions will outline the key features of the system. The revenue cycle under the batch processing sales order system has 5 main steps in obtaining and recording customer orders. First is sales process, then credit approval, third is warehouse operation, fourth, shipping department operation, and the data processing functions. The first step is the sales process, which begins in the sales department with the receipt of a customer order indicating the type and quantity of merchandise being requested. At this point, the customer order is not in a standard format yet and may not be in a physical document. Orders may arrive by mail, by telephone, or from a field representative who visited the customer's place of business. When the customer is also a business entity, the order is usually a copy of customer's purchase order. Now, the primary objective of this step, which is the sales process, is to ensure that the relevant data about the transaction are transcribed into a standard format that can be processed by the selling entity's system. The document prepared in this procedure is called the sales order. The sales order captures vital information such as the customer's name and address, account number, and the item's name, number, and description, and the quantities and unit prices of the item sold, and so as the other financial information such as the taxes, discounts, and freight charges. Now, in this example system, the order taking process is manual. That is why it results to a multiple copies of sales order, which serve different purposes. Now, the number of copies created of the sales orders may vary from system to system, depending on the operations to be supported. Now, in this hypothetical system, um, it uses sales order copies for credit authorization, tracking slips, stock release documents, and shipping notices. Pero sa actual system, the copies would be numbered or color-coded to signify their purpose and distribution. While for the copies naman that are used for more than one purpose and go to a several location, they may have a routing information printed on them. Now, after preparing the sales order, the sales clerk files a copy of it in the custom open order file for future reference. This is because filing the order and getting the product to the customer may take days or weeks. Customers frequently contact their suppliers by telephone to check the status of their orders. Now, to facilitate these inquiries of the customer, the open order file is often organized alphabetically by customer name. Although um, the approach of organizing alphabetically by customer name is not an efficient primary key for accessing data. However, this approach is still used because customers do not always know their account numbers and may not have copies of their invoices handy. So in this case, situations like this, the customer file enables the clerk to find the sales order and respond to the customer's question even if the customer doesn't know or does not have their account numbers. And now for the second step of obtaining and recording customers' order is the credit approval. Now, the credit approval is the next step in this revenue cycle. This step is also known as transaction authorization, which involves verifying the customer's creditworthiness. The circumstances of the sale will determine the nature of credit check. Now, kung yung sale is initial sales or new customer pa lang, usually the nature of credit check process will involve the seller to perform a full financial investigation on the new customer to establish a line of credit. And then after that, it will set a credit limit. Now, kapag yung sale naman is subsequent sale na, meaning nag-purchase na dati pa yung customer, yung nature of credit check lang usually ginagawa dito is to ensure that the current sale does not exceed the credit limit. Now, sa hypothetical system, yung credit authorization copy of the sales order is sent to the credit department for approval. And ito for approval. Now, once approved, the returned approval will trigger the release of other sales copy. So, kapag na-approve na yung credit copy, tapos binalik na sa sales department, yung other copies of sales order, matitrigger na i-release to their own respective departments. And then after that, the credit copy is filed in the customer open order file. Now, since diba na as I've mentioned na, the approved the once the approval are returned, it triggers the release of other sales order copies simultaneously to various departments. An example of this is the stock release copy. And so, yung pag-release ng stock release copy na to is, yung sales department, nakisend siya ng stock release copy papunta sa warehouse. Now, kung stock release, this is also known as the picking ticket. Now, this document or the picking ticket identifies the items of the inventory that must be located and picked from the warehouse shelves. This also provides a formal authorization of the warehouse clerk to release custody of the specified inventory. And then after makuha yung stock or after picking the stock, the clerk initials the stock release copy to indicate that the order is now complete and accurate. And then kapag there are circumstances naman na merong out of stock, yung out of stock items are noted on the stock release copy. And now the stock release then travels with the goods to the shipping department. Now, prior to the arrival of goods and the stock release copy, yung shipping department, di ba nag-release siya ng stock release sa warehouse. At the same time, mag-release din siya ng copy papunta sa shipping department. And yung copies na sinend sa shipping department contains the file copy, the packing slip, and the shipping notice of the sales order. The packing slip travels with the goods to the customer to describe the content of the order. Now, the shipping notice informs the billing department that the customer orders have been filed and shipped. This document contains such pertinent facts such as the date of shipment, items, quantity shipped, the carrier, and freight charges. And then in some systems, the shipping notice is a separate document prepared in the shipping department. And then upon receiving the goods from the warehouse, the shipping clerk reconciles the physical items with the stock release documents, the packing slip, and the shipping notice. This is to verify the correctness of the order. This reconciliation is an important control because it is the last opportunity para ma-detect yung errors bago i-ship yung mga items na in order. Now, after the reconciliation, the shipping clerk packages the goods, attaches the packing slip to the container, completes the shipping notice, and prepares a bill of lading or BOL. After that, the shipping clerk transfers custody of the goods, the packing slip, and 2 copies of the BOL to the carrier, then performs the following tasks. First is record the shipment in the shipping log, sends the shipping notice to the billing department as proof of shipment, and then files 1 copy of each of the BOL and the shipping document. Now let's talk about the data processing functions involved in the batch processing sales order system for the revenue cycle. The computer system presented in the figure depicts a series of computer programs which perform dedicated tasks. These programs are called runs. Each run processes a batch of sales order transaction in its entirety and then passes the batch to the next run. When the last run processes the last transaction, the batch process is complete and computer resources are released until the next batch of transaction is scheduled to be processed. Now, depending on the number and nature of the transactions to be processed, Batch processing may be performed several times per day or as infrequently as once per month. Now let's look at the first process, which is data entry. The data processing begins with the arrival of batches of shipping notices from the shipping department. These documents are copies of the sales order that contain information about the type and number of units shipped, customer data, prices, rate charges, taxes, and information about the carrier. To control processing, the data entry clerk assigns an ID that is unique number to each batch and calculates batch control totals, including the total sales and total number of records in the batch. After the calculations, the data entry clerk then converts the batch of hard copy shipping notices and the batch control data into a digital transaction file. Now, the edit run is the first run in the batch process. This program validates transaction by testing each record of the existence of clerical or logical errors. The typical tests include field checks, limit tests, range tests, and price times quantity extensions. Any detected errors are removed from the batch and copied to the separate error file. Later, these errors are corrected by an authorized person and resubmitted for processing with a subsequent batch of transactions. The edit run recalculates the batch control totals to reflect changes due to the removal of error records. Now, the clean transaction file is then passed to the next run in the process, which is in the sort run. Now, the sort run in batch processing system may employ either sequential files or direct random access files. As the name implies, sequential files are organized sequentially by their primary key. To update a sequential file, the transaction file must be organized in the same order as the master file. The sort run accomplishes this by physically reordering the sales order file by account number, which is one of its secondary keys. Now, the accounts receivable update run or the AR update run posts the account receivable by sequentially matching the account number key in each sales order record with the corresponding record in the account receivable master file. The system then calculates a new account receivable balance for each customer based upon the current balance in the old account receivable master plus the invoice amount from the sales order transaction record. This is shown in this figure. Now, the records in the old account receivable master that are not updated by a transaction are copied directly to the new account receivable master. This process thus creates a physically new account receivable master that incorporates all the changes to the customer accounts. In addition, it preserves the original old account receivable master file in its complete and unchanged form as a backup. So, this method is illustrated in the figure 9.2. At the next scheduled batch process, the new account receivable master becomes the old account receivable master, and another new account receivable master is created as described previously. So, in this figure, it shows a method that is known as grandfather-son update approach. This approach creates several generations of old master files as backup. Now for the inventory update run, um, for illustration purposes, um, it is assumed that the inventory master depicted in this figure is a direct access random file, which is, um, I mean, which is a file that has inventory number as the primary key. Now, if we recall in the discussion from chapter 8 in the book or in the reference, the direct access file structures allows records to be accessed and retrieved directly rather than having to search through the entire file. Now the inventory update run reduces the quantity on hand field in the affected inventory records by deducting the quantity sold field in each sales order. The direct access file use a destructive write approach for updating. Therefore, the original quantity on hand value is replaced or destroyed by the new calculated value. And this approach, the so-called destructive write approach, there is no backup file copies that are automatically created. Now, a so-called separate back procedures is needed to be performed prior to each scheduled batch process. During the update process, the system compares the value of quantity on hand to the reorder point fields in the inventory master. This comparing procedure uh, is performed in order to identify inventory items that need to be replenished. This information is sent to the purchasing department, which triggers the purchases procedures in the expenditure cycle. For the general ledger update run, the general ledger accounts may be updated either after batch or in an end-of-day process. Now, after each batch update, a digital journal voucher is added to the journal voucher file to reflect total sales, cost of sales, and changes to the accounts receivable and inventory general balances. And at the end of the day, the general ledger system accesses the journal voucher file and posts to the affected accounts. Now, in the illustration, figure 9.1, or as shown in here, implies a general ledger with a random files structure, allowing direct access updates. Now, for the end-of-day procedure, um, the end-of-day procedure will also generate a number of management reports, including sales summaries, inventory status reports, transaction listing, journal voucher listing, and budget and performance report. Now, these quality management reports play a key role in helping management monitor operations to ensure that controls are in place and functioning properly. Now let's take a look into the batch processing system in the case of cash receipts. Cash receipts procedures are natural batch systems. Unlike sales transactions, which tend to occur continuously throughout the day, the cash receipts are discrete events. Checks and remittance advices arrive from the postal service in batches. Likewise, the deposit of cash receipts in the bank often is a single end of business day event. The cash receipts system in the figure shown, which is figure 9.3, employs a combination of manual procedures and batch processing with direct access files. Now, the batch processing cash receipts system has 5 main points, which are the mailroom, cash receipts department, account receivable department, Data Processing Department, and Controller's Office. Now, the first main point is the mailroom. The mailroom separates checks and remittances advices, then prepares a remittance list as a control document. Now the checks and a copy of remittance list are sent to the cash receipts department. The remittance advices and another copy of the remittance list are then sent to the account receivable department. And in the cash receipts department, the cash receipts clerk reconciles the check with the remittance list and prepares deposit slips. And via terminal, the clerk then creates a cash receipts transaction file as input for the batch process. Unlike in the previous example, the data processing in cash receipts system does not house a centralized data entry function. Instead, the data entry role has been distributed to the user areas who submit their transactions remotely. Next, the clerk files the remittance list and one copy of the deposit slip, and at the end of the day, the clerk deposits the cash in the bank. For the account receivable department, the account receivable clerk receives the remittance advices and a copy of remittance list from the mailroom. At the conclusion of the batch update run, the clerk also receives a listing of transaction process and a summary of changes to the account receivable. Now these two documents are then reconciled and filed in the department. And in the data processing department, the customer's remittance data that was entered into the system by the cash receipt clerk are edited by the data entry program and stored on a transaction file. Now, the first in this data processing department, there are two kinds of run. The first run is the master file update run, and the second is the GL update run. This is here. The master file update run and the GL update run. Now, the first run in the batch process is the master file update run. This one, which updates the affected customer records in the account receivable master. It also records the event in the cash receipts journal and adds a record to the journal voucher file. The master file update run also prepares a transaction listing for the account receivable department to review. The second run in the system is the GL update run, which is an end-of-day process. Now for the last main point, we have the controller's office. So, as a control on the overall accuracy of the recorded cash receipts and deposits, the controller's office conducts periodic reviews of the deposit slips that was returned from the bank and the remittance list prepared in the mailroom. This periodic review reconciles the overall final deposit and the total original receipt. And now, let's move on to the second data processing alternative of revenue cycle, which is the integrated real-time processing system. Advanced technologies allow system designers to integrate accounting and other business functions through a common information system. The objective of integration is to improve operational performance and reduce costs by identifying and eliminating non-value added tasks. This involves replacing traditional procedures with procedures that may be very different. Now, in this type of system, we see how advanced technologies can significantly alter or simplify the revenue cycle. Now, similar to the first system, we will also discuss integrated real-time processing systems in the case of sales order and cash receipts. Now, Figure 9.4 illustrates an integrated sales order system which employs real-time processing of transactions. Now compare this with flowchart to the basic batch system presented in Figure 9.1. You can see that the credit checking function is automated and the tasks that was previously triggered by a hard copy documents are now supported by digital documents. Now let's look into the integrated real-time sales order system. The integrated sales order system begins with the sales clerk receiving customer orders, which may be a hard copy document as illustrated in the figure 9.4, or it may also be received via email, fax, or phone. Now, using a computer terminal that is connected to the central sales order system, the clerk enters the sales order, which initiates the system to perform the following tasks. The system performs 7 tasks. So the first task is the system accesses the inventory subsidiary file and checks the availability of the inventory items requested. The system then performs a credit check by reviewing the customer's credit record in the credit history file. The credit history file contains information such as the customer's credit limit, current balance, date of last payment, and current credit status. Now, based on program criteria, the customer's request for credit is either approved or denied. Now, if the credit is approved, the system adds a record to the sales invoice file, then transmit a digital stock release document to the warehouse, and sends a digital copy of packing slip to the shipping department, which now follows the third task of the system, in which the warehouse clerk's terminal immediately produces a hard copy printout of the electronically transmitted stock release document. The clerk picks out the goods and sends them to the shipping department accompanied by a copy of stock release. And for the fourth task, the shipping department performs its usual task, which is reconciling the goods with packing slip, preparing them for shipment, and selecting a carrier. Now, after the goods are shipped, the shipping clerk accesses the system and transmit a digital shipping notice to signal that the transaction is complete. And for the fifth task, upon the receipt of shipping notice, the system automatically performs accounting task. And the sixth task, the system updates the general ledger accounts. In this example, the general ledger accounts are updated in real time. And for the last task, finally, the system produces and distributes various management reports, such as sales summaries, inventory status reports, and general ledger change reports. Now, let's dive into the integrated real-time processing systems in the case of cash receipts. Figure 9.5 illustrates an integrated cash receipt system. The system presented here assumes that an organization in which customers make payments on account with physical checks that are mailed to the company. Now, in this system, it has four main points, which is the mail room, cash receipts department, automatic data processing procedures, and controller's office. So, for the first main point, which is the mailroom clerk opens the envelopes containing the checks and remittance advices and endorses the checks for deposit only. The clerk then reconciles the checks and remittances advice and prepares a remittance list. Now the checks, the remittance advices, and a copy of remittance list are sent to the cash receipts department. And in the cash receipts department, the cash receipts clerk reconciles the checks and the remittance advices with the remittance list, then prepares a deposit slips. Now via terminal, the clerk accesses the cash receipt system and creates a record in the remittance file, or also known as cash receipts journal, for each remittance advice received. The clerk files the remittance list, remittance advices, and one copy of the deposit slip. And at the end of the day, a member of the security group deposits the checks in the bank. And in the third main point, when the cash receipts data entry is complete, the system automatically performs the following task. First, it closes the sales invoice that are covered by the customer checks by placing the customer check number and payment date in the invoice record. Then, it posts to the GL accounts and prepare and distributes various management report, including transaction listings, and discrepancy or out of balance report, and general ledger change reports. Now for the last main point, finally, a clerk in the controller's office periodically performs a reconciliation of the remittance list, bank deposit slips, cash receipts journal, and the general ledger cash account. Now let's move on to the third data processing alternative, which is the point of sale or POS system. The revenue cycle systems that we have examined so far are used by organizations that extend credit to their customers. Now, obviously, this approach is not valid for all types of business enterprises. For example, yung mga grocery stores, which do not usually function in this way, meaning hindi sila nagpapautang. Because usually yung operations sa mga business enterprises such as grocery stores is that they exchange goods directly for cash in transactions that is consummated at the point of sale. Hence, the title point of sale system. Now, the POS system, like shown in the figure 9.6, are used extensively in, as I mentioned, grocery stores, department stores, and other type of retail organizations. In this example, we assume that only cash, checks, and bank credit card sales are valid. Hence, the organizations maintains no customer account receivable, and the inventory is kept on the store shelves and not in a separate warehouse. And also, the customers personally pick the items they wish to buy and they personally carry them to the checkout location where the transaction begins. Now, the point of sale system has two main procedures: the daily procedures and the end of day procedures. Now, for the daily procedures, first, the checkout clerk scans the universal product code or the UPC label on the items being purchased with a laser light scanner. Now this scanner, which is the primary input device of a POS system, may be handheld or mounted on the checkout table. So I think the best example of this is like sa Gaisano, sa SM, makikita naman natin 'di ba sa cashier doon, yung merong mga devices na parang may laser and then nag-scan sila ng yung mga barcode. Parang ganito din yun. Now, in this case, the POS system is connected online to the inventory file, from which it retrieves product price data and displays this on the clerk's terminal. The inventory quantity on hand is reduced at real time to reflect the items sold. And as items fall to the minimum levels, they are automatically reordered. When all the UPCs are scanned, the system automatically calculates the taxes, discounts, and the total for the transactions. And the calculation depends on two cases. First is the credit card transactions, and second is the cash sales. Now, in the case of credit card transactions, the sales clerk obtains transaction approval from the credit card issuer via an online connection. When the approval is returned, the clerk prepares a credit card voucher for the amount of sale, which the customer signs. The clerk then gives the customer one copy of the voucher and secures a second copy in the cash drawer of the register. And for the cash sales, the customer renders cash for the full amount of sale, which the clerk secures in the cash drawer. Now, on the third procedure, the clerk enters the transaction into the POS system via the register's keypad, and record of the sale is added to the sales journal in real time. The record contains the following key data, which is the date, time, terminal number, total amount of sale, cash or credit card sale, cost of items sold, sales tax, and discounts taken. And in this, the sales is also recorded in two-part paper tape. One copy is given to the customer as receipt, and then the second copy is secured internally within the register and the clerk cannot access it. So this internal tape is later used to close out the register when the clerk's shift is over. And at the end of the clerk shift, as I mentioned, a supervisor unlocks the register and retrieves the internal tape. The cash drawer is removed and replaced with a new cash drawer containing a known amount of startup cash, also known as float, for the next clerk. The supervisor and the clerk whose shift has ended take the cash drawer to the cash room or treasury where the contents are reconciled against the internal tape. The cash drawer should contain cash and credit card vouchers equal to the amount recorded on the tape. However, there are certain times in which small discrepancies will exist because of errors in making change for customers or kapag nagsusupli. Now, there are organizational policies that will specify how cash discrepancies are handled. And there are um, two main examples of policies. The first is that some organizations require the sales clerk to cover all cash shortages via payroll deductions. And the other is that organizations establish a materiality threshold. The cash shortages within the threshold are recorded but not deducted from the employee's pay. The excess shortages, however, should be reviewed for possible disciplinary actions. And for the fifth daily procedure, when the content of the cash drawer have been reconciled, the cash receipts clerk then prepares a cash reconciliation form and gives one copy to the sales clerk as a receipt for cash remitted. And the cash receipts clerk also records cash received and cash short or cash over in the cash receipts journal. Now then, the clerk files the credit card voucher and secures the cash in the safe for deposit in the bank at the end of the day. And speaking of end of the day, um, and now we have the end of day procedures in which the cash receipts clerk prepares a three-part deposit slip for the total amount of cash received. One copy is filed and then the other two accompany the cash to the bank. And because cash is involved, armed guards are often used to escort the funds to the bank depository. And finally, a batch program summarizes the sales and cash receipt journals. This program also prepare a journal voucher and posts to the general ledger account as follows. So ito yung example ng um, entries na pinupost sa general ledger account. Now, this entry may vary among businesses. Some companies will treat the credit card sales as cash, while others will maintain an account receivable until the credit card issuer transfers the funds into their account. And now, we have Mr. Jiff Ian Inocentes to discuss the second section of the audit procedures associated with the revenue cycle.
Let's now discuss management assertions and revenue cycle audit objectives. As we have learned, audit objectives are directly related to the management assertions about the presentation of financial statements. To achieve these audit objectives, the auditor must design audit procedures that gather evidence to either corroborate or refute these management assertions. Achieving the audit objectives involves a combination of tests of controls and substantive tests. Next slide. Now, let's discuss the assertions related to revenue cycle and its corresponding audit objectives. First, we have existence and occurrence. Ang audit objectives po dito is to verify that the accounts receivable represents amounts actually owed as of the balance sheet dates and to establish that sales is representing the goods shipped and services rendered during the period covered by the financial statement. Second is completeness. Ang audit objective is to determine that all amounts owed to the organization at the balance sheet dates are reflected in accounts receivable. Kung kompleto po ba lahat ng accounts receivable at the balance sheet date and yung i-verify po kung yung mga goods na na-ship or services na na-rendered or yung mga returns and allowances for the period are included. So, kompleto po ba yung mga lahat ng na-ship na goods na na-record po ba? So, yun po. Yung accuracy naman po, ang audit objectives naman po dito is to verify kung yung mga accounts po ba or goods na na-ship, tama po ba yung quantity or tama po ba yung price na dapat niya na ibenta. Also, to ensure that yung subsidiary ledger po ng accounts receivable at yung general ledger nagtutugma po ba or nagtatali. Next slide. Sa rights and obligation naman po, ang audit objectives po dito kung meron po bang legal right yung entity regarding po sa accounts receivable. Kasi minsan po, di ba, yung account receivable pwedeng ibinebenta para pambayad po sa utang or naka-factored po siya. Kapag ganun po yung accounts receivable, dapat mag-reflect po sa financial statement, mapatunayan po na dapat hindi siya kabilang or na-remove na siya doon sa total amounts ng accounts receivable na reflected po sa financial statements. Next naman po is valuation or allocation. Ang audit objectives naman po dito kung tama po ba or nakasunod po ba sa standards yung measurement ng accounts receivable balance. Dapat po mapapatunayan na naka-net realizable value po siya. And to establish the allocation for uncollectible accounts is appropriate kung tama po or meron pong probability na yung accounts receivable is hindi makokolekta. So, dapat po may naka-allocate na allowance for uncollectible accounts. Last naman po yung presentation and disclosure. Ang audit objectives po dito is to verify that accounts receivable and revenues for the figured are properly described and classified. Kasi di ba po minsan yung mga entity, yung mga sales or revenue na dapat i-recognize sa different periods or sa susunod na period, inire-recognize nila sa current period para po mas maganda or mas mataas yung sales nila. Para po sa presentation ng income statements for loan purposes or other purposes po ng entity. So, ito po yung mga management assertions na related po sa revenue cycle and its related audit objectives. So, now, let's discuss the computer application controls. So, as we learned previously, computer application controls are categorized into three types. We have input controls, process controls, and output controls. First we have the input controls. So sa input controls po na related sa revenue cycle is number one, credit authorization procedures. So it ensures credit worthiness of customers. So ang purpose po nito or objective is maiwasan po ng entity na ma-associate po sa mga customer na merong possibility na hindi makabayad. Now, control techniques vary considerably between batch system and real-time system. Kasi po, di ba, kapag manual system ang pinaka-controls po niya with regards to credit authorization, meron pong credit department or credit manager na nag-i-implement o responsible sa pag-implement ng entities credit policy. So, while sa real-time system naman po, meron pong program na responsible for decision rules which is ang trabaho po niya is to validate, yes po. Halimbawa po sa credit card, if meron po ba siyang if meron pa po siyang credit or hindi pa po nagagamit yung credit limit niya para po mag-proceed sa sales po. So, now, in testing credit procedures, ang trabaho po ng auditor is to verify effective procedure exists. So, kung meron talagang ganong control or credit authorization procedure yung isang entity. And then, verify information is adequately communicated and then verify effectiveness of program decision rules. So, ito po, mas applicable po siya sa real-time systems or doon sa point of sale, yung kagaya po sa mga department store para po matest yung controls na to. Yung program na to, if effective po ba siya, gumagamit po ng data or ITF yung mga auditor. So ito po yung napag-aralan natin before. And then ang trabaho pa po ng auditor dito is to verify that authority for making credit decision is limited to authorized credit personnel or procedure. So ito medyo may ano po siya sa authorization po kasi 'di ba po pagka po yung nag-o-authorize ng credit is unauthorized po. So pwede pong magkaroon ng sales na hindi naman po pala ganun ka merong credit worthiness yung customer. And then yung perform substantive test of detail and then sa review of credit policy periodically and revise as necessary. So, kapag po yung credit policy ng company medyo lousy po or hindi ganun ka-effective para ma-prevent yung mga customers na walang credit worthiness, magkakaroon po ng kumbaga yung sa pag-recognize po ng uncollectables po ng accounts receivable. Next slide po. Now, second naman po is yung data validation control. So, dito po it is intended po to detect transcription errors and transaction data before they are processed. So, ang objective po nito is to detect yung mga transcription errors like yung addition errors, truncation errors, saka po yung yung substitution errors. So, kapag po batch system yung gamit ng isang entity, yung data validation po dito is after shipment na po ng goods, and ang ano po niya is yung mga error log, error correction, computer processes, and then yung sa transaction resubmission procedure. So sa real time naman po, ayan, dahil real time po, errors handled as they occur. So, yun po yung dapat ginagawa ng data validation. So, ayan, yung napag-aralan po natin na na-discuss na rin po ito ng previous reporters. So, self-explanatory naman po itong mga missing data checks, numeric alphabetic data checks, limit checks, range checks, validity checks, at saka po yung sa check digit, more applicable po siya sa real-time system. Now, for testing data validation controls naman po, ang objective ng auditor dito is to verify controls exist and are functioning effectively. So, kung sa batch system, kung meron po bang error logs or kung meron pong error correction, computer processes, yan po yung tinitest ng mga auditor dito. And then kapag naman po yung validation of program logic can be difficult kasi kapag po weak yung, di ba po yung sa mga napag-aralan natin na system development cycle, di ba meron pong part doon na or phase na maintenance. So kapag ka-weak yung pag-develop ng ano na yun, medyo difficult po yung sa pag-test ng data validation. So pero yung auditor po dito, para mas efficient po yung pag-test po ng data validation, pwede pong gumamit yung si auditor ng test data or ITF po. Next slide po. For batch controls, ito mas applicable po siya sa mas applicable po siya na gamiting control sa pag-manage of high volumes of similar transactions. So ang purpose po ng batch controls is to reconcile output produced by the system with the original input, and controls continue through all computer data processes. So, ang pinaka-significant element po ng batch control is yung tinatawag natin na batch transmittal sheet. So, yan po yung pinaka-element ng batch control natin para makita po during ng pag-process ng batch transaction. Nakikita po natin kung ano yung mga changes. So, yung batch transmittal sheet po ng content po niya is yung dapat may unique batch number, dapat may date, transaction code, yung record count, batch control total, tsaka po yung sa hash total, ayan. So, napag-aralan na po natin yan. So, na-discuss na po ng Group 7, na medyo kung specific na po, hindi na po natin i-explain. Now, for testing batch controls po, it involves reviewing transmitted records of batches process and reconcile them to batch control log. Then sa examine out of the balance control out of the balance condition and other errors to determine cause of error. So, to test po yung batch control, yung mga output of the balance condition, ang ginagamit po dito usually is yung type po ng generalized audit software natin, which is yung ACL. So, dahil yung mga command po ni ACL, like yung profile total count, ayan, so makikita po ni auditor kung ano po yung tamang batch total, tamang count nung sa batch process natin. And then, review and reconcile transaction, listing errors, logs, etc. Next slide. Now, for process controls naman po, which includes computerized procedures for filing, updating, and restricting access to data. So, depending on the level of computer technology in place, process control may be also include physical manual tasks. So, Sa file updating, may tatlong techniques po dito, which is yung una, yung file update control. So, yung controls na to ensures that each run in the system processes the batch correctly and completely. So, pinagko-compare po dito halimbawa yung sa invoice amount saka yung sa record count na accumulate and then compared to the corresponding value stored in the control record. So, tinitingnan natin kung may discrepancy. Since kapag may discrepancy po, it means na may error sa batch or loss during the processing of batch file po. So next is transaction code controls. So ang usually yung revenue cycle systems designed siya to process multiple record types. So every transaction meron siyang transaction code for proper and efficient processing of data. So dapat yung controls na to, ang objective is tamang transaction code yung ginagamit for processing. Next is sequence check. So for sequence check po, kung in sequence ba or in order yung transaction records kasi critical yun. So for example, kung hindi appropriate or hindi inadequate yung sequence check control, pwedeng ang mangyari kapag may error sa sequencing, yung downstream na to, yung records na na-process, pwedeng maling customer account. Next naman is yung next is testing file update controls. So testing data that contains error which is incorrect transaction codes or out of the sequence. So to test if the controls are in place, pwedeng gumamit si auditor ng ITF or test data. So yung technique dito naggagamitin ni auditor requires careful planning. Single audit procedure can be devised that performs all tests in one operation. So, yung efficient use ng logic testing ng CATS or CAATTS like ITF require careful planning kasi by determining in advance the input and process controls to be tested, a single audit procedure can be devised that performs all tests in one operation. So, parang hitting two birds in one stone kapag nagkaroon ng careful planning. So, ang evidence na relating dito sa assertion na to is yung existence, completeness, and accuracy. Now, next slide po. Now, let's talk about access controls. The primary purpose of access controls is to prevent and detect unauthorized and illegal access to the organization system and or assets. So, sa access control, super self-explanatory niya. Ang mga controls na to like warehouse security, kung may proper security ba yung warehouse natin, yung mga inventories natin na ipapaship ba sa mga customers. So, yung depositing cash daily, ito yung mga cash natin since prone siya sa thief. Ayan ang ano natin sa raw controls is dapat nade-deposit yung mga nare-receive or collection natin ng cash. Tapos use safe deposit box, night box, lock cash drawers, and safes. And then yung sa accounting records, dapat authorized users lang ang may access sa accounting records natin since they are very important sa firm, and if there is no access controls, pwede magkaroon ng removal of an account from the books. So, ayan kung may walang segregation of duties which is matatakin natin mamaya. Now, unauthorized shipment of goods using blank sales orders. So, pwede mangyari yan kapag walang proper access controls. So, pwede yung isang employee makapag-ship ng goods sa isang customers or sa hindi naman talaga customer using blank sales. Tapos, removal of cash kapag walang proper control sa mga cash receipt na pwedeng makover ng adjustment to cash account. Tapos, theft of products or inventory. So, covered by adjustment to inventory or cash accounts. So, now, in testing access controls, The evidence gathers about the effectiveness of the access controls, tests the management assertions of existence, completeness, accuracy, valuation and allocation, right and obligation, and then yung presentation at this disclosure. So, included dito sa mga sa pag-test ng access controls kung meron bang adequate passwords or data encryption, may firewalls ba, uh, and then yung sa user's view since dapat yung sa pag-access ng network at databases, so dapat meron adequate functioning controls for access controls. Now, next slide please. For physical controls naman, more on sa ano to, sa segregation, sa duties saka sa supervision. So sa segregation of duties, may tatlong role tayo dito. So to effectively protect the data and the physical attributes ng mga related sa revenue cycle. So, yung rule number 1 is yung transaction authorization separate from transaction processing. So, dapat magkaiba magkaiba yun. So, kung sino ang nag-authorize, dapat hindi siya yung nagpa-process ng transaction. So, for example, sa credit department, yung nag-authorize ng sale, iba doon sa nagpa-process ng sale para maiwasan yung mga fictitious sales. So sa rule number 2 naman, asset custody separates from record keeping task, very self-explanatory. Yung rule number 3, organization structure such that fraud requires collusion between two or more people. So yung organization structure niya, mas maganda na may involved na two or more people. Kung kung magkasabwat, mas mabilis ma-actionan yung fraud na nangyari within the entity kasi the more na mas marami yung taong involved, mas mabilis yung ma-detect yung fraud na nangyayari. So, next is the supervision. Now, sa supervision naman kasi since yung segregation of duties ay di naman applicable always sa lahat ng entity, lalo na sa mga small entities na di kayang paghiwa-hiwalayin ang different duties ng mga employees. So, ang pinaka fiscal control na pwedeng gamitin ay yung supervision. So, dapat yung supervision kasi nagpo-provide siya ng control in systems that are not properly segregated, necessary for employees who perform incompatible functions. So, compensates for inherent exposure from incompatible function and can be supplement when duties are properly segregated. So, pero pwede din siyang supplemental sa meron ng nai-implement na segregation of duties. So, mas maganda yung more preventive control kasi yung supervision. So, next slide. Then sa physical control naman po, yung independent verification, ayan. So, review the work of others at critical points in business process. So, purpose is to identify errors or possible fraud. So, applicable siya sa shipping department at sa billing department. And for testing physical controls, review organization structure for incompatible tasks. Kung meron bang employees na yung task niya is incompatible, which is yung sinabi natin kanina na yung sa hindi dapat same employee, yung like record keeping at saka sa asset custody, dapat magkaiba yun. So, yung tinitest ng auditors and then sa task normally segregated in manual system gets consolidated in DP system. So, duties of design, maintenance and operations for computers need to be separated. So, ayan, dapat segregated yung duties nila. Dapat yung sa pag-design na tackle to sa system developments, dapat magkaiba sila ng trumatrabaho, and then yung program should not be responsible for subsequent program changes. So since pwede tong magka-conflict, yes, um, magkaroon ng conflict of interest, pwedeng magkaroon ng possible na fraud kapag yung programmer na nag-design, siya din yung responsible sa pag-maintain or sa pag-change ng dinidevelop ng mga programmer. So, dapat magkaiba yun. Dapat segregated yung employees na may trabaho doon. So, next slide. Moving on, we have the output controls. So, dito, ini-ensure lang natin na yung mga output natin, which is mostly hard copy, is not lost, okay? Or misdirected or corrupted if soft copy. So, ini-ensure din dito na yung financial transaction are accurately processed and reported, on which is validates the system processes natin is nagpa-function as intended. So, sabi dito is yung output controls are designed to identify potential problems. So, paano nga ba? So, the first one is we have yung reconciling general ledger to subsidiary ledger. Although specific to, hindi siya limited for this type of documents. So dito sa reconciliation, pwede tayong magdagdag ng certain types of transaction processing error. So paano? For example, nagkaroon tayo ng monthly reconciliation ng bank statement with our cash receipt or journal. So, dapat yung cash receipt natin in our books is equal doon sa cash natin in the bank. So, doon pwede tayong magkaroon ng imbalance is malaman natin or ma-identify natin na meron error na nangyayari within our system. So, although di natin malalaman yung specific cause ng error, but pwede natin siya malaman through examining all transaction. But although time-consuming yun, ang ginagawa ng mga businesses is sinasummarize nila ang entire debt transaction in one batch, which usually ginugroup nila yung mga transaction into small batches, but depend pa rin sa volume kung gaano karami transaction yung nakukuha ng isang business. The second one is to maintain an audit trail in which dito is yung detailed record na ng lahat ng transaction and changes within the system para ma-review natin and ma-verify yung mga transaction na gusto natin i-verify. So, we have the different types of audit trail output controls, in which the first one is an account receivable change report. Dito is trinatrack lang natin yung mga changes na nangyayari sa accounts receivable natin. Ang purpose ng report na ito ay ini-ensure lahat ng changes sa AR natin ay properly record and can be reviewed para ma-prevent yung errors or unauthorized changes, because yung AR can be used as a tool for fraud kasi connected din siya sa cash. The second one is transaction logs. So dito is ito yung mga records ng mga transaction na successfully processed na natin, which also serves as a journal. So ang purpose ng report na to is malalaman natin kung ano or sino ang nagkaroon ng transaction, kung sino ang responsible for that recording, at makita rin natin yung mga discrepancies at yung mga irregularities between sa amount and sa record. And then we also have transaction listing, which leads to the hard copy of transaction ng lahat ng successful transaction. Then dapat dito ay pupunta lang siya to appropriate users to facilitate the reconciliation doon sa nangyaring transaction. Ang susunod ay yung log of automatic transaction. So dito is lahat ng mga internally generated transaction na automatic is must be placed in transaction log kasi at the end of the day it is a transaction, although yun nga hindi siya manually or yung kailangan pa ng order from people na nagkaroon tayo ng log dito para maging accountable and ma-reconcile if magkaroon na magkaroon man ng discrepancies. So we have here unique transaction identifiers. So dito is dapat each transaction process ay must be uniquely identified with a transaction number para dito malaman natin yung it helps to trace a particular transaction para sa through a database, especially if marami tayong volume of transaction. And yung last is we have error listing. So which is a list of lahat ng errors na mapupunta dapat sa appropriate user para ma-support nyo yung error correction, and at the same time mabago niya at pwede siyang ma-resubmit ulit for validation. So bakit ba natin tinitest yung output control? Since yun nga yung output is ito na yung mapupunta sa end user. So dapat minimake sure natin na yung mga output na lalabas sa atin ay complete and accurate, because it can affect yung mga economic decisions ng business and also ng mga end users. Specifically, nire-review natin yung mga summary reports for accuracy, completeness, timeliness, and yung relevance niya sa mga decisions. So nowadays, modern system audit trails na ang nangyayari, in which hindi siya like manually sinusulat, but more on stored na lang siya online, no? So gumagamit tayo dito ng data extraction software, which can be yung ACL nga, or yung integrated test facility, or even other data extraction software. So in this module, specifically, ang dinidiscuss is yung ACL and ITF. So, sa ACL is pwede mo lang ma-search specifically yung file na hinahanap mo to verify completeness and accuracy ng report na yan. So, while sa ITF is, yun nga, ma-permit niya yung auditor na makaproduce ng isang batch of sample transactions na mayroong error records and trace them through lahat ng basis of reporting, processing, and then ma-detect kung alin doon yung error and kung alin yung valid transaction. So that's all po.
We will now dive into the substantive testing of revenue cycle accounts. Substantive tests are audit procedures used to detect material misstatements at the assertion level. In the revenue cycle, these tests focus mainly on revenue and accounts receivable. The goal of auditors here is to ensure that these accounts are not overstated, misstated, or incomplete. These tests are designed with consideration to inherent risk, control risk, materiality, and audit efficiency, which are the fundamental factors that guide audit strategy. Next slide. As emphasized in the module, revenue and accounts receivable are often prone to overstatement. This can happen in various ways, such as recognizing revenues from sales transactions that did not occur, recognizing sales revenues before they are realized, cut-off errors, or underestimated allowance for doubtful accounts. For example, we must watch for large or unusual transactions near the end of the period because this could be an attempt to manipulate earnings. When auditing the revenue cycle, we don't just rely on one type of procedures. We need to perform both test of controls and substantive procedures. Control testing helps us assess whether the client's internal systems are reliable. If they are, we might reduce our substantive testing. But regardless of controls, we still need to perform substantive tests like confirming balances or vouching transactions. This helps us directly test the assertion of accuracy, completeness, and existence in recorded revenue and receivables. Next slide, please. Before we can test data, we need to ensure our audit files are ready when using IT-based audit tools like ACL. We ensure that it is correct file version and structure, flatten complex files if needed, use ACL's verify command for data integrity, and save and reuse file definitions for repeat access. This helps prevent us from analyzing corrupted or incomplete data, which could lead to incorrect conclusions. Each file, whether it's for customers, sales invoices, or inventory, needs to be accurate so we can properly conduct our tests. Based on the module, each of these files play a role in testing different assertions. For example, yung customer file, it is used by the auditors to verify creditworthiness of customers before sales, ensure sales are only made to authorized customers. It supports the accuracy assertion by confirming terms and credit policies are applied correctly. The sales invoice file, it helps auditor perform vouching and recalculations to test accuracy, checking if invoice amounts match supporting documentation and trace from shipping documents to invoices to test completeness, ensuring all shipped goods were invoiced and recorded as revenue. The line item file supports the sales invoice by giving detailed breakdowns per item sold, quantities, unit prices, and discounts. The inventory file is reconciled with line items and the cost of goods sold to test completeness and accuracy of inventory and sales recording. The shipping log file naman is important for testing the cut-off assertion. Auditors use it to verify that revenue was recognized in the right accounting period. Lastly, the cash receipts file is used kasi once payment is received, it gets logged in cash receipts file. So these files are used for data analysis and tracing procedures to ensure that recorded transactions are valid and properly valued. Next slide. There are two key assertions, yung accuracy at completeness. Pag sinabi nating accuracy, it means recorded transactions reflect the correct amount. Pag completeness naman, it means that all valid transactions are included. Errors in either can mislead users of financial statement. Audit procedures must be aligned to catch these issues, especially in high-risk areas like revenue recognition. Kasi halimbawa, if there is a failure to record all sales results in understated revenue, which violates the completeness assertion. The table from the sales invoice file contains data anomalies, yung illustration na nasa PowerPoint. These anomalies may indicate input errors, processing failures, or potential fraud. So yung first move ni auditor here is to scan and clean data to ensure it's ready for testing. Next slide, please. Thank you. When testing accuracy, we're checking if the transactions are recorded correctly. The module outlines common risks such as transaction errors or failed batch processes. To detect this, we performed re-performance of calculations, review system edit checks, and validate data using source documents. Halimbawa, we may recalculate invoice totals or verify pricing against the master file. So these steps help ensure that the data was processed and recorded accurately. Here in figure 9.10, we see the logical relationships between different files in the revenue cycle system. This is important for understanding how we perform substantive testing using data linkage. This diagram helps auditor trace transactions through the system as the module emphasizes. It also supports systematic audit trail reviews, which are part of testing completeness. Next slide, please. This diagram shows how auditors use filtering techniques to isolate unusual or high-risk transactions. Once the files are validated, we use ACL commands or the audit tools to filter data that meets certain risk criteria. For example, filtering for sales recorded near period end period end helps us identify potential cut-off errors and isolating large or unusual amounts. Now, let us focus on transactions that may have been manipulated to inflate revenue. By filtering these records, we're able to prioritize transactions for further substantive procedures such as vouching to source documents or tracing to shipping logs, case steps for testing accuracy and completeness assertion. Next slide. For the completeness assertion, the goal is to make sure nothing is missing from the books. Auditors trace transactions from source documents to journals rather than the other way around. That way, we ensure all transactions were recorded, and we also review input controls, perform system reconciliations, and inspect audit trails. For example, tracing from shipping documents to sales entries will help us catch missing sales. In conclusion, accuracy and completeness are important audit assertions that ensure financial statements reflect true and complete information. To achieve reliable audit results, auditors must perform both control and substantive testing to assess the effectiveness of internal controls and verify the integrity of recorded data. The use of IT audit tools is also important as these allow auditors to efficiently analyze large volumes of digital data and detect any irregularities. Furthermore, a thorough understanding of system logic and the design of internal control is important for identifying potential weaknesses and ensuring that all transactions are processed and recorded correctly. That's all for my part.
The next substantive test is testing the existence assertion. Confirmation of accounts receivable is one of the most widely performed tests of existence. This test involves direct written contact between the auditors and the client's customers to confirm account balances and transactions. In the Statement on Auditing Standards number 67, Confirmation Process, it states that auditors should request confirmations of accounts receivable except in the following three situations. The first situation is if AR are immaterial. Second, based on a review of internal controls, the auditor has assessed control risk to be low. And the third situation is that the confirmation process will be ineffective. Next slide. Assuming that AR are material and that the auditor has decided to request confirmations from the client's customers, the confirmation process involves three stages. The first stage is selecting the accounts to confirm. Next slide. Selecting AR accounts for confirmation involves processing data that are contained in both the sales invoice files, which provides the financial information needed for the confirmation request, and the customer file, which contained the customer mailing information. Obtaining the set of accounts needed for confirmation requires three steps. The first step is to consolidate the invoices. This requires consolidating the open invoices of each customer. Next slide. As we can see in Table 9.3, we have several open customer invoices, and some of them belongs to the same customer. In ACL, the command Classify allows the auditor to filter only the open sale invoices and summarize the invoice amount based on the customer number. The summarized records are then passed to a new file called Classified Invoices presented in Table 9.4. Next slide. The second step to obtain accounts for confirmation is to join the data from the two files, the customer file and the classified invoice file. Next slide. Combining these two files will produce a new file called Accounts Receivable File, which is presented in Table 9.6. As you can see, only the relevant data of the customers are included in the new file. and then the credit limit is not included anymore because it is not needed in preparing confirmations. Then, the invoice amount from the classified invoice file is also copied into the new file. Next slide. The last step in obtaining accounts for confirmation is to select a sample of accounts from the joint file. In large organizations, the AR file may contain thousands of records. So, instead of confirming all of those accounts, the auditor may just select some of those accounts as a sample of records. ACL's sample feature offers two basic sampling methods: the random sampling and the monetary unit sampling, or MUS. The choice of methods will depend on the auditor's strategy and the composition of the AR file. Random sampling gives each account an equal chance of selection and is useful for account balances that are fairly evenly distributed. On the other hand, MUS biases the sample towards larger amounts and is useful for skewed with large customer account balance. Next slide. The next stage in testing the existence assertion is to prepare a confirmation request. Next slide. This stage involves preparing confirmation requests that contain the information captured in the AR sample file. The requests, which usually takes the form of letters, are drafted and administered by the auditor, but are written in the client entity's name. Confirmation requests can be positive or negative confirmation. In a positive confirmation, recipients are asked to respond whether their records agree or disagree with the amount stated. Positive confirmations are particularly useful when the auditor suspects that there may be disputed accounts, confirming unusual or large balances, or when a large proportion of total accounts receivable arises from a small number of significant customers. A problem with the positive confirmation is poor response rate. If the recipients did not respond, the auditor cannot assume it is an agreement, and second or even third requests may be needed to be sent to non-respondents in order to obtain a higher response rate. The second type of confirmation is negative confirmation. This asks the recipients to respond only if they disagree with the amount shown in the letter. This technique is used primarily when AR consists of many low-value balances and the control risk of misstatement is low. A limitation of a negative confirmation is that non-responses don't confirm agreement. Responses to negative confirmations cannot be used as a basis for determining the total amount of misstatement, but can be used instead to reinforce the auditor's prior expectation that the account balances may be materially misstated and that additional testing of details is needed to determine the nature and amounts of the misstatement. Next slide. So here, shown in figure 9.11, is an example of letter of confirmation, particularly a positive confirmation. Next slide. The last stage for testing the existence assertion is evaluating and controlling responses. Next slide. Maintaining control over the confirmation process is crucial for reliable evidence. When it comes to controlling responses, the auditor should ensure that they retain custody of the letters until mailing, that the confirmation letters and self-addressed stamped envelopes are addressed to the auditor, and that the confirmation request should be mailed by the auditor, with supervision if client personnel are involved. When it comes to evaluating the responses, differences in the amounts reported by the recipient should be investigated. Non-responses to positive confirmations should also be investigated using alternative procedures such as reviewing subsequent cash payments to see if the invoices were already paid. Next slide. The last substantive test for the revenue cycle is testing the valuation or allocation assertion. The auditor's objective is to ensure that AR are stated at net realizable value. To achieve this objective, the auditor needs to review the AR aging process to determine that the allowance for doubtful accounts is adequate. Next slide. As accounts age, the probability of their collectivity is decreased. Therefore, reviewing the aging process of AR is needed. As a general rule, the larger the number of older accounts that are included in an organization's AR file, the larger the allowance for doubtful accounts needs to be to reflect the risk. Hence, the auditor shall resolve whether the allowance calculated by the client is consistent with the composition of their organization's AR portfolio and with the prior years. The auditor should also review past due balances with credit manager to obtain information for basing an opinion on their collectivity. Next slide. Here shown in table 9.7 is an example of aging of accounts receivable table. That would be all for our presentation about the topic, the revenue cycle. Thank you everyone for listening.